Screen. Okay, so you should be good for now, and then I will be back. I don't have to do Belfort this
Okay,
morning.
well, wait a minute,
Well, now you have to share again.
oh, I have to share. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I,
What's that?
it says you're sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop sharing and then start again.
Anyway, that'll work.
Okay,
That'll work.
so
Okay.
maybe what happened was that when I set it up to record, it lost the sharing link
Oh,
because I had to go, I had to go non-full screen in order to get to the menu for recording.
okay. Sounds good.
So it sounds like maybe you just needed to try sharing again to stop sharing. Looks like you're set. So anyway, I'll be back. Yeah. So anyway, this book and then shooting and they said it was 40% of all Christians in the US. And
Yeah.
it's pretty extreme. It's the ones that are all into Satan and Jesus. Jesus. That book is like the definitive thing about it. It's like you should. I don't want to hit people over the head with it, but
So what was the author's name?
the author is Matthew D. Taylor, Taylor. Well, I can send it.
Yes. Note on it because I'm developing a list of possibilities. Kind of all about it.
But this definitely is something I think we should all even looking on schedule. This is what majority leader, Speaker of the House.
Oh, yeah.
He's in this room.
Oh, yeah. There's
And they're the ones with the flags and
a whole lot of the people that are from school. Except is
yeah. Oh yeah.
Betsy DeVos.
Yeah, I hadn't really
You read Stewart? Have you read the Our Worshippers?
Yeah.
How does it compare to that?
I don't really remember the relationship between the two.
I kind of got through Catherine Stewart's book and I appreciate the detail of it. All the things. For a general.
I'd at least go through it. But there's some good articles found online. Something where it was an essay. Yeah. Because something's close and personal.
Yeah. It's not just you and me this time.
Busy days.
In full screen mode. Now my microphone is on.
Didn't make the call last time.
Stop sharing. No, I'm still there. Okay. There we go. Okay. With my Word screen mode. Now, how do I get it out? Mhm.
So I was a teacher for many years, and when I was teaching at the university, I loved preparing the syllabus, preparing the classes. Did you feel the same way when you're preparing something?
I kind of get into it. Yeah.
I mean, it's just finding a creative way to approach something, and I don't know, I just found it challenging and fun. So, anyway,
You know. So, did you happen to read this whole section?
no, I thought about that last night. I thought, oh, I had homework and I didn't do it.
That's all right. By the way, there were a bunch of Southminster people at the play last week. I assume you were there.
Yeah, I saw Michelle.
Michelle was there, and then Carolyn and I can never remember her husband's name. Nori's parents. Carolyn sings in the choir. Nori's one of the
Okay, yeah.
they were there, and didn't sound like Rick and Jean were.
No, they didn't get tickets to it, but wasn't it good?
It was so well done.
I know. I think it's one of the top productions I've ever seen there. Of course, as Lorraine points out, it helps when you have good material, but still, it was so well performed, so well cast. It
Well,
was,
two of those four have become such regulars. I mean, Leaf Norby and Anna. So I want to say Anna Song, the younger woman. They've been in everything over the last few years, and they're both so good.
just she loved the younger one, Honey, in her blue dress.
Yeah,
She was, oh, I just thought it was
she
excellent.
was the Sweeney Todd production we saw. She was
of Mrs. Levitt, and she was supposed to just be the understudy for it, and the main person had issues, and she ended up, I think, doing most of the series, and I was glad we got to see her.
Yes.
She was so good.
That Ribbon Rap.
It was, for the center stage, they
Oh,
did
good.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf,
Oh, yeah.
and it was so well done. And, you know, they kept warning us about how long it was gonna be. It didn't feel long to me at all.
No.
Because it was good. It's a difference.
Like,
One could sit there and count how many drinks they poured during the 3 hours.
Some of my parents coming home after seeing that movie, because my dad was a college professor, and he said they thought that they were going out to a light movie about a college professor and a marriage. They thought this would be good, like, okay. Just, yeah, they were shaken by that.
Except, well, yeah.
Well, no, when
The
you know
theme
what to
is
expect.
applied.
Yeah, but if you go into it thinking you're going into a romantic comedy about a college professor.
It was a
However,
comedy.
there was a lot of laughter. I mean,
It was
it
dark.
was
funny,
so
yes.
well done.
Dark humor, but-
Okay, guys, I think it's probably us.
Oh, yeah, we gotta go. Okay, so first question is a kind of literary one. One of the things that strikes us, I think, funny reading the Gospel of Mark is that several times he has something happen 3 times. It made me think of, are there any nominations from the floor? Are there any nominations from the floor? I mean, and so the first time it happens is during the time they're kind of on their way to Jerusalem. It's not yet the final week. Jesus tells the disciples that they're going to Jerusalem and he will be killed, and tells it in slightly different ways each time. And it happens several times during the rest of the story where, you know, Jesus denies him or Peter denies him 3 times. Pilate asks the crowd, you know, what should I do with this guy? And again, he asked the crowd, what should I do with this guy? And again, he asked the crowd. You know, it was like, it was an interesting literary device. And I'm trying to think if I've ever seen an author use repetition as a way to emphasize a point. As a reader, it strikes me as odd because I've never seen. I guess probably in ancient literature, maybe it was more common, like if you read Roman histories or something. I don't know. Can you think of anything like that you've ever read where something gets repeated?
Well, not off the top of my head, but I would imagine it's common. Maybe not hitting you in your face, but you know, there's a lot of foretelling and, you know, to make things understandable, you never want things coming out of the blue in a novel.
Right.
So I'm sure if I went back and read passages with thinking, how many times are there clues about this, I would find them.
Yeah. Foreshadowing. I guess maybe
Things that are, you know,
maybe modern authors are more adept at foreshadowing,
yeah.
and Mark is kind of in your face with it.
Right, and these are so many translations that have been translated with an agenda many times. So I mean,
Yeah,
but I think it would be a common practice.
I would think that would probably appear other times in the Bible, that things would be repeated multiple times. Like, you know, prophecies and things.
yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And of course, Pastor Scott asking over and over.
Yeah, that's the one that's.
I mean,
little
that's a
unusual.
very obvious one, and probably where that comes from. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, where does that come from?
So, but you also missed the point of what Mark's doing here if you just talk about him foretelling his death, which we could have a discussion about whether we really believe Jesus was, you know, had a specific foretelling of his death to his disciples. But I think his point is, you know, what happens next after he tells the disciples this? And every time it goes kind of like this. This is the second one. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, good morning, ladies.
Good morning. We apologize.
You are most welcome. You just doubled the size of the class. So
Yeah, sit in the front row.
you pull that chair out of the way.
Should probably move this legal. People will not be by that.
The church library.
Oh, thank you.
So we were just talking about that first part there where there's a whole section of, I think it's mostly in chapter 10 of Mark, where they're journeying toward Jerusalem, and it's all about Jesus talking directly with his disciples. There's no crowds or whatever. And Jesus 3 times foretells his death, which we're talking about that as a literary device. We're not used to authors saying something 3 times to make a point anymore. But that's kind of what Mark does several times during his story. Something happens not once, never twice. It happens once, or it happens 3 times. And that made me think of our congregational meetings where are there any nominations from the floor? Are there any nominations for some reason it's in our bylaws that the moderator of the meeting has to say that 3 times.
Is that right?
But I was just going to read one of them because he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. So Jesus tells them this, but they don't get that. I think that's Mark's main point, is that the disciples never got it.
Yeah.
And these are the people that Mark would have been looking back on from 70 AD, who were the early leaders of the Christian movement, and pointing out again and again how clueless they were in the moment when it was all happening. Because then what happens next? Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. So variations of this little scene happen 3 times. Jesus says, we're going to Jerusalem and I'm going to be killed. And the disciples kind of like scratch their heads and then go, which one of us is going to be greatest? It's like, it's not only do they not understand what he's saying, they don't understand what he's saying. I mean, and this is like the whole point of the journey to Jerusalem is this is it's all going to happen. It's happening. We're going to do it. Like, oh, which of us is going to be like the top dog? So this is why John Dominic Crossan and others say that part of the mission of the Gospel of Mark is to critique the performance of the early leaders of the church from a hindsight perspective. It's probable that none of these disciples were still alive or involved, in leadership in any way by 70. So that would have been 40 years later. That's a long time in those days. So anyway, over and over and over again. So, and it's a fun thing to follow through the book of Mark. It's like, who gets it and who doesn't. The reality is almost nobody gets it until until the woman who comes up a little later who anoints him. That's why that story is so important. Okay, so now they get to the last 7 days. Now Sunday, they've set up camp in Bethany. All the disciples had a house they could stay in Bethany, which is just a couple miles out of Jerusalem. So the flow of the last 7 days is they're camped at Bethany and they go into the city during the Passover festival. Most days, it kind of looks like Wednesday. It kind of implies that they didn't actually go in the city, and but we'll get there in a minute. So Sunday, I mean, we all know the Palm Sunday story. We've heard that many times. It's in all four Gospels. It's slightly different, but Mark's is the first one we get. He wrote earliest. So we won't go into that one. It's pretty clearly kind of a clown parade. It's kind of a mocking the emperor or the governor's entrance into the city by having their own little parade on a donkey, instead of on a gilded chariot or whatever the big shots were arriving in. So Monday comes and they head into the city, into Jerusalem. And on the way, Jesus sees a fig tree that has no figs on it, and he curses it. And then,
As you do.
yeah. I don't think it's meant to be taken literally, because what happens is they go into the city, and then the scene where Jesus turns over the table of the money changers and says, quotes Jeremiah saying, "My house shall be a house of prayer for all people, but you have turned it into a den of robbers." And again, I'm sure you've heard enough sermons on that story to know that that's not really about, what the money changers were doing was evil. It was more, the system was evil. If the whole collusion between the temple leaders and the Roman authorities and so forth. But then, so then they go back to Bethany for the evening, and then the first thing that happens on Tuesday is they pass that fig tree again, and it's withered. So what Crossan and Borg point out is this is something Mark does where he frames a story. You have to look at those three stories as a set. He curses the fig tree, then he critiques or criticizes or blasts or whatever you want to say the temple economy system and says it's all corrupt, and then the fig tree has withered. So it's Mark's way of saying that the temple system is like a fruit tree that's not bearing fruit. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So if we just hear these stories in Sunday sermons, we miss some of the structure, the framing. Mark's actually very deliberate about framing stuff like that. So now Tuesday is like the longest day of the week as far as the Bible is concerned. After the fig tree business, then it's a whole lot of encounters of people coming to Jesus with questions, or trying to entrap him or challenging him on something or other. And these are all pretty interesting stories in and of their own weight, but So remember, and it's kind of interesting to see, I don't have on this outline who the questioner was in each case. Let me see if I can kind of summarize that really quickly. So as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders came to him and said, "By what authority are you doing these things?" And Jesus responds with a gotcha question about John the Baptist that they can't answer because of the crowds. And so that's that story. But that's a key theme throughout the gospel is what was Jesus's basis of authority, and that's what because he was challenging the authority of the priests and scribes, and they pretty much got everybody in that one. Then he tells a story about the parable of the wicked tenants who were put in charge of a vineyard and they didn't take good care of it. It did all kinds of nasty, awful things. Pretty clearly, placement of that story right at that spot makes it clear that that is an indictment of probably mostly the temple, the whole temple leadership system, which was a collusion between the chief priests and the Romans. And then is where you get the question about taxes. We know that preachers love to preach on that one. In this case, the questioner is some Pharisees and some Herodians tried to trap him with the question about taxes. Now, the Herodians would have been Jewish people who were in tight with the Romans. You said you see. So again, a little what do you call it? A little verbal jousting in that story. We're trying to come up with the question to trap Jesus, and Jesus always comes up with something to trap the questioner, and then they go away dumbfounded. And let's stop and throw in one thing here. What is your sense of the role of the crowds in the Passion story? Has anybody seen like Mel Gibson movie or a traditional
Traditional.
passion play kind of thing? Anybody been to Oberammergau and seen the passion play?
Well, isn't it that, I mean, my memory of the crowds is that, they're all with Jesus when he's coming into town, and by the end of the week, they're, most of them are not with him.
Mhm.
That's,
It's you get that impression because it's kind of a mixed message between the different versions of the story. In it, like
happy crowds.
Yeah, happy
People were
crowds.
singing Hosanna and waving the palm flowers.
but famously, when Hitler was coming into power, he saw the Passion play at Oberammergau, which has been a famous one that's done every 10 years or something.
Truck over there.
And and loved it because it's so anti-Semitic, because the crowds are pretty universally shouting crucify him, crucify him through much of the play. And if you were working strictly off the Gospel of John, which is the last one written of the four Gospels we have, you might get that impression, because by the time John is written, there is quite a bit of conflict between the followers of Jesus and Jewish people who are not, and they're sort of being kicked out of synagogues and stuff. And so the Gospel of John is pretty anti-Semitic, but the Gospel of Mark is not. And what actually the way the drama plays out is that when these leaders come and try to trap Jesus and he sends them away frustrated, it pretty universally says, and they went away kind of muttering and scheming, but they didn't want to make a move against Jesus because of the crowds. So the leaders that Jesus was putting to shame with these little conversations were in Mark are kind of universally kind of working back behind the scenes and scheming, trying to figure out how to arrest Jesus without inciting a riot. So they're sensing that there's a lot of the crowd behind Jesus through almost all of this.
I had the sense with all this that using the crowds, using the religious leaders and all of that was basically a way of not blaming the Romans for the writers who were scared of a backlash from the Romans.
That's true. And even in Mark, it's almost all of the bad stuff comes from the temple leaders who were in cahoots with the Romans. But Pontius Pilate, who was known from other sources to be a really, really bad dude who would crucify anybody at the drop of a pin, or comes off as a pretty okay guy. So yeah, there's not. You're right. There is that kind of flavoring of it, putting most of the blame on the temple leaders and not on the Roman governor. So there's a question about taxes. Then there's a question from the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, about some mechanics of how resurrection works. And Jesus sends them packing as well. So it's like all these different groups get their shot at him, and Jesus survives all of these attempts to take him down. Then there's a very interesting story. I've never heard any biblical scholars say this, but that the last question in this series, the question about the first commandment, it's so different from the others that I have kind of a theory about this one. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and beside him there is no other, and to love him with all the heart, with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than all the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And then no one dared to ask him any questions. It's kind of a funny little story after all of the people taking shots at him and getting sent packing, and nobody getting it. Nobody gets it. This one scribe comes along and almost gets it. He's like, "You're really close." It's like, and my theory of that particular story is it may be the writer, Mark, inserting himself in the story, saying, "What if I had been there? What would I have asked? What would I have said?" And because Mark obviously is a scribe. He's literate. He can read and write, and probably was trained as a scribe in the system. And so it just struck me as funny. It's kind of out of place, that story of the one scribe who almost gets it. And then they move on, say, no more questions after that. So,
The last word.
yeah, the last word was this. So,
I've seen Mark gets the last word then. In your book.
well, then
Do you have
they
the
go
version.
on, but it was certainly the last word in this particular section, this series of questions. So then Jesus turns to just teaching the crowds and his disciples some things. And somewhere in here it says, the crowds loved what they were hearing. So back to the question of the crowds. So there's some of these scenes where Jesus is kind of explaining things to people, and they're like, "Yeah, we love this guy. We love this guy." So nobody's shouting, "Crucify him" at this point. Then we get to another story that we've undoubtedly heard preached on many times: the widow's mite, the widow's offering at the temple. And how many times have you heard this as a stewardship season sermon about giving till it hurts? Well, that's not what it means at all. That's, and you only see that if you read more than just that one story and read just what comes before it. So we just read those two paragraphs and see how it really changes the meaning. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." Now, if you think that's saying good things about giving all of your money to the temple, that's not it at all. He's talking about inequality of the temple tax system. This weren't a donation. This was a tax. This was a required thing. And what did he just said about widows in the prior paragraph? That the scribes love taking the houses of widows. So it was really Jesus saying, look how unfair, unjust, unequal this system is, where people are required to give money, but the rich can give part of what they have and look and say, look at me, look how much I gave. But this poor widow has to give her last penny. Not always the sermon we hear on that particular passage. It's all about economic justice. So, I don't know, anybody have anything more to say about the widow's mite? Okay, we'll move on then. Then there's a whole long section of apocalyptic teaching that is kind of a study of its own. People have a lot of different opinions about it, but it's it's kind of it's kind of one of the things that makes us think that Mark was written right around the time of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. And it has Jesus saying, look, awful things are coming and these things are going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And so to me, it makes the most sense in terms of Jesus kind of predicting the fall of Jerusalem, so forth. So on Wednesday, like I said, it doesn't even say on Wednesday that they went into Jerusalem. This probably all happened at Bethany. On Wednesday, it says, it was 2 days before the Passover, Tuesday, and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him, for they said, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. Then we have the story, which again is a pretty familiar one, where the woman, while he was at Bethany, this is all at Bethany, sat at the table, and a woman with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. And then the disciples go, oh, when was he wasting this? And Jesus basically says, I've been trying to tell you that I'm about to be killed, and this woman is the first person that got it. I mean, it's just, she's the first person in the whole book that really understands what Jesus was talking about his death. And then, again, the framing. Authorities were looking for a way to get Jesus after the story of the anointing. What happens next? Judas goes to the authorities and says, I will betray him for you. So again, framing, within the subject of how are we going to arrest this guy? Oh, here's somebody that will betray him. I think we've got him now. You have this anointing scene framed. It's interesting literary structure that again you usually miss if you just get it from Sunday sermons, because you don't get the before and after frame on the story. What I'm sure we've all heard that anointing story preached on a number of times. You have any interesting thoughts about it? What's that story mean to you in the context of Holy Week? One of the things I always find odd and interesting about that story is Jesus said, she gets it. This woman will be remembered forever, wherever my followers are, blah, 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 but they don't give her a name. It's like, we're supposed to remember her.
Oil lady.
The oil woman, yeah. The nard woman. Always drives me crazy when spelling bee puzzle doesn't take the word nard. It seems like a perfectly good word, but it doesn't take it. I guess it's the only place I've ever seen the word nard is in that particular story.
I wonder how nameless women were at the time.
Well, Mark isn't afraid to name other women who were among Jesus' followers. Anyway, that's all that happens on Wednesday. We're supposed to spend Wednesday talking about how Jesus was betrayed and all of that, and also talk about the woman who got it right. And then, of course, a lot happens on Thursday, we know. It starts with the Passover meal. There's nothing given in the story on Thursday before the meal. I don't know. Is a Seder meal usually done in the evening or earlier in the day? I don't know. I think it can be either one. But again, one of the things we talked about last week is that this timing structure, this liturgical structure, if you will, to the way Mark has all of this happening, it all fits within the Jewish calendar. I mean, it makes for a Christian calendar of events for Holy Week that fits within the structure of celebrating Passover. So,
But in the Jewish calendar, things change at sundown.
that's true. So, yeah, I mean, and it does say on the first day of unleavened bread when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. So I think these events do start earlier on Thursday and not after sundown, but who knows? But actually, it kind of the stories kind of continue on into the night, so there's not really a change at sundown in this story. I don't know. All it says is it's the day of Passover, the main Passover celebration meal. So they eat the meal. Jesus tells his disciples someone's going to betray him. Then the words of institution that we always use at communion: "This is my body, this is my blood." Jesus then tells them once again he's going to be deserted and denied. So there's actually sort of a little framing around the communion thing there for foretelling his betrayal, and then it sort of happens a little bit later. Jesus prays in the garden. Again, that's a three-timer. He goes off and prays, then he comes back, finds the disciples sleeping, goes and prays some more, finds the disciples sleeping, goes and prays. So prays in the garden 3 times. Then he's betrayed and arrested, appears before the high priest, and then Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Nice little trios. And then on Friday morning, Friday is literally divided into 5 3-hour periods in Mark's telling of the story, ending at sundown, where Jesus' body is removed from the cross and placed in a tomb just in time for the Sabbath. So none of this, interferes with the Sabbath commemoration. And then the last couple things that happen in the story then are on Saturday evening, which is at sundown after the Sabbath is done. Women go out and buy spices. Wouldn't have been right to buy spices before sundown because that was still the Sabbath. And then they get up on Sunday morning and take the spices to the tomb and find it empty.
Can I ask you a logistical question?
Yes.
What is coming up in Sunday starter for the next few years?
Next week, we're not going to have Sunday starter because there's a Warm Springs event and Bunny event, and a bunch of stuff happening after. And then the 2 weeks after that, Pastor Scott is going to lead with, not sure exactly, something about historical Jesus, something appropriate to Lent and getting to know the history, the historical Jesus a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is great, very interesting.
I think it's fun to get the full, here's what the full week or so looked like,
Having it outlined like this is really helpful.
instead of little sermon pieces that we kind of know, but we don't know the glue that holds it together. We don't know.
I don't know the dangers of taking things out of context. Yeah, we do it all the time.
Yeah.
Right, in the Bible, religion is very famous for that, cherry picking it. And what do they call that, word grouping?
Oh, yeah, proof texting.
Proof texting.
Yeah, I came home with a mug from the West Star conference I went to last year. And they have their official West Star conference mug. It says, I can do all things through one verse taken out of context.
I like that.
What we just read from book club, there's this woman and she
Yeah.
said church and they say, there's one line where she says, everybody is fighting and spouting scripture and it feels like they're just reciting the contents of Chinese fortune cookies. That's exactly- Yeah. Oh my.
Yeah. And the sad part is that there's so many people who think that they say things like, if you challenge their basic assumptions about atonement, salvation, or, whatever about Jesus, which isn't really in the Bible at all. And they say, well, you've just contradicted 99% of the New Testament. No, this contradicted maybe 1% of the New Testament. But, they come to believe that whatever they believe is what the entire Bible says. So anyway, it is time to go to church.
Yeah, thank you, dear. That was great.
And
So tell your friends about the upcoming Sunday starters so that more people know about it and are looking forward to that together.
yeah.
I will.
And also, we have a big idea for after Easter of doing something more topical, more because we've been kind of heavy on Bible